Hey guys, how are you?
Hi, Sai. Good. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Is that you, Rosemary?
Yeah, that's Rosemary.
Okay. Are you helping us facilitate today's webinar?
No, I think I am a trainee. Did you need help?
Oh no. I just logged in a little early
Oh,
for today's event. So
no, I'm just one of the trainees. I want to see how it goes on.
okay. All right. All
Yeah,
right. Have fun. All right.
I will. So I'm having problems with this, this survey that you sent earlier.
Okay. What problems are you having with it?
Why is it insisting that I give more details? Suppose I don't have more details.
Oh, the survey is built to, because we're going to be running some analyses on the words you use.
Yes.
We're requesting 100 words.
Oh,
So you've got to reach a certain number of words in order for it to be
okay.
selected. Okay.
Okay, I'll keep going. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Thank you. All right. I'm gonna run to the little boy's room before we start, so I'll be right back.
Okay.
All right.
Hey, Sai, it's Gabby.
Hey, Gabby, how you doing?
I'm sure if you'd be on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sign out as ATD NYC and I'm going to sign back in as myself.
Okay, all right. I am gonna tell Lyndon actually to sign in as ATD as well, so we can co-host.
Okay, I think you might keep taking the rights back from each other. So
Okay,
I'm
that's fine.
wondering if I can go on the website and make Lyndon just an alternative host.
Okay.
Let me see if I can do
Can you see my screen right now, the slides that I'm sharing?
that. I can.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
All
All right, so
right.
I'll see you in a little bit.
All right.
I'm going to start recording right now, and I want to welcome everybody officially to the ATD New York City People Analytics SIG event. And thank you for being here. I know things have been crazy. I appreciate everybody's time. If you haven't done so already, please make sure that you introduce yourself in the chat box and let us know what you hope to learn from the webinar. Let us know what you came here for, why you showed up, what are you hoping to get out of today's webinar. We hope you get a lot out of it. I expect there to be a lot of fun to be had in this particular webinar. And if you haven't done so already, please make sure that you complete the survey at this link. I'm going to share it again, which is tinyurl.com/ATD People Analytics 2020. All right, so we need your data to give us stuff to work with later on. Lyndon will be running some analyses on the data that you present, all right, that you give us. All righty. Very, very good. I'm going to wait 3 more minutes just to let anybody else who is waiting to get in. We've got a couple of other people that are on their way trying to get in. Let's see. All right. Give everybody a minute or so, and then that'll give us a little bit of time just to get to know one another a little bit. All right. Let's see. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat window. If you're one of our call-in guests, then please interrupt me during this during this discussion. We're hoping to have a lot of fun and get a lot out of today's session. So if there's anything that we can answer for you, please feel free to either put it in the chat box, or if you're on the phone, feel free to interrupt. All right. So we've got a few other people. Hi, Lenovo guest. Hey. But okay, very cool. One other thing I want to mention in the chat window, you'll notice that there are a couple of little functions in there that you can say yes, you can say no, you can tell me to move faster or slower. For those of you who have listened to me speak before, my tendency is to speak very quickly. So let me know if I need to slow it down. And please feel free to connect with the other participants that are here in attendance today. We've got a lot of wonderful, very smart people on today's, in today's webinar. So I'm really looking forward to participating and getting everybody kind of involved in this process. All right, one more minute, just waiting on other people that might join us. Let me know if you have any questions.
I'm looking at the survey responses so far, Sai. It looks like we've got about 11 or so completed surveys. And we've got a little more than double that in our room, but I think, we'll be able to have a good proof of concept here. Interestingly enough, I'm looking at the distribution for an archetype right now, and I'm happy to see lots of data folks and analysts and things of that nature in this group, or people defining themselves as such. So this is kind of cool.
Is great. That is great. Okay, very good. Welcome, Nadia. All right, so quick reminder, in the chat box, you will see, I'm going to reshare this for everybody. I'm going to share the link for this survey. So please make sure that you complete the survey if you haven't done so already. It's also been emailed to you in your inbox. So that's a part of today's session, is completing the survey. So we've got some data to play around with, though according to Lyndon, we've got enough data to have a little fun with. So very, very cool. Alrighty, so it is officially 6:06. And we will get started. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do today. So let's go on to our next slide here. Let's talk a little bit about an agenda. So the first step is survey completion. I know that the survey takes a little bit of time. That's okay. I'm here to talk you through a little bit about this. I'm here to talk you guys through this process of people analytics and give you guys a little overview of what people analytics in action might look like. We're going to talk a little bit about a definition of people analytics. It's a word and a phrase that gets used very often in a variety of different settings. And what we really want to do is we really want to have a sense of what that concept is. What do we mean by people analytics? It's a term that sometimes, in some cases, seems a little scary, but I think you'll find that it is very straightforward once we get through the process of talking about it a little bit. After we do that, you guys actually are going to play a role in our analysis process. Then I'm going to hand things off to Lyndon. Lyndon's going to mention and go over the actual data. He's going to talk a little bit about the analysis, and then we're going to come back to you guys. We'll talk a little bit about focus grouping some of the data that we're going to collect. At the very end of today's session, there's going to be a Q&A, sort of a more formal Q&A. But what I would like to mention for everybody is that throughout today's session, if you can't tell, I'm pretty open kind of guy. I'm happy to talk to everybody about what your experiences might be with with people analytics and questions that you might have about the process that we went through. And I'm really happy that we can get everybody involved and that everybody's here despite some of the challenges that we might be facing. All right. With that in mind, let me just do a quick introduction of ourselves. So here are our presenters. Lyndon Llanes, who is the Talent Intelligence Manager over at Verizon, and my name is Dr. Sai Islam. You can just call me Sai. I'm the VP of Consulting over at Talent Metrics and also an Associate Professor at Farmingdale State College, among other places. And we are the co-chairs of the People Analytics SIG that you might have heard about earlier as the People Science SIG. And I wanted to take a little time to just talk a little bit about why the People Analytics SIG exists. A former president of ATD New York City, Margaret Carlson, she and the former VP of Special Interest Groups, Mies de Koning, suggested that we start this people analytics SIG because this had become such a big part of talent development. And it's existed in a variety of forms. Data has always existed in the human resources function in a variety of ways, but it hasn't really become as formalized or as automated as we're about to see in today's world. So a lot of the things that we're going to talk about are things that are kind of just introductory to people who are kind of getting a taste of what people analytics might look like and what what people analytics projects might be about. Lyndon, do you want to say anything more about yourself before we move forward?
Yeah, just briefly. You'd mentioned that I work at Verizon as a talent intelligence manager. So just a little bit of the background that I have is really spending a lot of time analyzing different types of data in different shapes, usually structured and some unstructured data through text, where we used open text data to kind of help us understand how jobs are being shaped out and evolved, what skills are required for the jobs, and whether it's better to, open up shop, or where can I find talent? Is it better in Arkansas, Antarctica, or New York, based on the available data? And a lot of that is really taking into account the things that Sai says, that previously the use and structure and availability of this data didn't exist. And the advent of the digitalization of the world and everything being interconnected gives us the ability to do some really cool analysis.
All right, so that's great. Great intro for of Lyndon, and good framing for what we're going to be talking about. Just to give you guys a sense of how Lyndon and I met many years ago, and he has far surpassed my expectations for the work that he's able to do, and I'm very impressed with the stuff that he's shown me from Verizon. As a independent consultant that does work in data analytics, today we're going to be spending some time talking about qualitative analyses, which have a special place in my heart. At the end of today's session, one of the things I'm going to share with everybody in the chat window and also by email is a link that has a series of resources that you can use to continue the learning journey. So even though you're getting a little bit of a taste, you can imagine this almost like one of those Costco sampler bars today, and you're going to get hooked on enjoying this stuff, and then you're going to go home and buy a whole bag of this. You're going to be like, oh, I want to work on this type of thing more and more. It's going to be lots and lots of fun. Alrighty, so that's enough of an intro for us. Please feel free to tell us more about yourselves in the chat window, and I'm glad that we've gotten a chance to connect with everybody over the chat window. All right, very good. So you guys might have noticed, but this is not how I planned this at all. This is not what Lyndon and I talked about. This was not what we thought we were going to be doing. We originally thought we were going to be doing this at Pfizer, and now what we're doing is we're presenting this virtually. So we really need we want to be able to enjoy your comments, your feedback, because originally what we had planned was that a portion of our audience would be here virtually, but the majority of people would be attending the event live. But what we're gonna lean on you guys to kind of give us some feedback through the chat window, and to feel free to speak up if we need some responses. So in the same way that we need you to respond to the survey, we're also going to need you to respond to information that we give, questions that we ask. And one really interesting part about this people analytics process is going to be that sometimes, in order for us, especially when we're talking about qualitative data, and I'm going to go through a little bit about what we mean by qualitative data, when we talk about this, one of the key things that we really, that we want to, kind of focus on is understanding the kind of dual role that our data sources often play within organizations. So we're collecting data from you, and later on, we're going to be asking for you to provide us with some meaning around this, around this data. One other thing you'll notice as well in this slide, even though I'm a little older than most millennials or Generation Z folks, even though I'm a little bit older than most folks, I love memes. So you might notice I've got the in the upper left-hand corner, I've got the roll safe meme, and in the right-hand corner, we've got a little meme related to something that you might have seen. Now that people are working from home in many cases, because of the coronavirus, the kind of challenges that they're facing with dealing with this sort of technology. So it's not just people's work, but also all of these events that are being transferred into webinars. So I'm glad that you guys could all be here, because without your participation, none of these events would be successful. And one of the cool things that we really want to focus on is how we can engage an audience this way. So really cool, really exciting way of approaching this. So quick question, and I'm going to ask this in the chat just so I can see what people have to say. And actually, my buddy Jack Appelman reminded me of this because this is really important. Can anybody, before I give you guys an actual definition of people analytics, what have you heard about people analytics? Anybody want to share in the chat window? What have you heard about, and can you define people analytics? So Kathy says, it's important for us to stay connected to offset the feeling of isolation. Yes, that is very true. Kathy, I have to say, I miss you. I have not been to an ATD event, without Kathy being there. So this is a nice chance to get to hang out with Kathy virtually. Anybody want to share in the chat window? What have you heard about? Okay, so wow. All right, so we got some great answers here. So Deborah says it is a function within HR, collecting and analyzing data to optimize human capital within an organization. Okay. Kian says, as I understand it, a way to collect human resources data for uses of organizational development and planning. Okay. Gabby says it's how to manipulate data to identify trends and information that can help you make better decisions. Clive says typically associated to HR type analytics. Okay, very good. These are all really great answers. And so people analytics as a field is relatively new. And so I decided to do a little something that I do pretty often when I'm trying to learn about new topics. Mega adds draw conclusions from the information/data. Very good. So one thing that I try to do is sometimes I'll look up terms in Google Image. I'll do a Google image search just to find out what pops up, what comes up. And I thought, let's see what comes up when I do a Google image search about people analytics. Mostly because sometimes when we see individuals, when we see, data popping up in different areas, or when we see images associated with a particular topic or term, that can tell us a little bit about how people view a specific topic or term. So you'll see on this next slide that I did a little Google image search in the left for the term Google for people analytics. And one thing you'll notice, let's see, let's put this into presentation mode. Oh, I thought it was in presentation. Oh, there we go. Very good. All right. So we've got my very exciting Google image search here. All right. People analytics. Okay. So we got data-driven decision-making in HR. We've got using data science to make hiring decisions. We got some pillars of people analytics. Wow. Very exciting. My favorite theme that I noticed in the images is, of course, the very futuristic looking matrixy like background. So you don't get to see this in all of the images that I've got here, but there is a heavy duty matrix style background in a lot of these images. So very, very exciting. All right, so the definition that I'm going to be using is one from an organization called the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology. And this is, the definition says, people analytics, also known as talent analytics or HR analytics, is defined as the attempt to understand patterns in an organization's workforce through analysis of employee-related data. So today, we're going to be looking at data that's related to members of an organization. And in this case, members of our little presentation, our little webinar crew today. This is an easy way of thinking about people analytics. It's from a paper by Carr and Fink. And in the link that I'm going to share with you guys in a little bit, there's a link to that paper in there, so you can do a little bit more reading on the topic of people analytics. A lot of times, the way that people talk about people analytics is as if it were a magic, tool, that it was going to solve everything and all the problems that you might have in your organization, even without thinking about it. But what we're going to learn today is that it really is a more rigorous process. The idea is to collect good data from a particular group, primarily employees, or trainees, depending on what sort of area you're working in, and then taking that data and identifying patterns and meaning. But when we think about people analytics, this is what we're really trying to do. Despite all of these like fancy sort of vendor images or pictures that we've got, what we try to do here is we try to use data to identify some sort of, key patterns and ideas. And so one thing I want to recognize is that as human beings, we consistently use data to make decisions. Your brain is processing data all the time, and you're identifying patterns whether you know it or not. When you go to a new place, or when you try when you travel to a new country, your brain is processing all sorts of new information and identifying patterns. Some of you may have recently stepped out of your house to do some shopping, and you might have been looking for certain patterns related to the coronavirus. So for example, the other day, I went to Target to pick up some groceries, and I was looking at people and trying to identify patterns in their behavior, a cough, a sneeze, etc. And I wanted to make sure that I stayed away from people who showed certain signs of illness. So that is something that we naturally do. The problem with human decision making is in many cases we are affected by bias, right? We make decisions that aren't necessarily the best. Right? So people analytics is a way to kind of use more objective data and to use machines to not replace human decision making, but to supplement it. Any questions on that so far? All right, so here's my favorite analogy when it comes to people analytics. You'll notice the gentleman on the left is working out. And this is a Victorian era workout. You can see lots of bells and whistles here in terms of that workout. And you'll notice on the right, there's a woman using a Fitbit to work out. And the reason I like using this workout analogy is because it's very intuitive. When we think about people analytics and the data that is available to us, in many organizations, a lot of organizations are functioning as if they're still in the 1920s, right? Or the turn of the century. We're still, making decisions that aren't really based on data. And the data that we do have isn't particularly well collected and isn't used very effectively. But if you think about the modern Fitbit, or the type of data that you can collect or that you can get from a variety of different organizations or devices that you have available to you, you can see the depth of information. If you imagine, I don't know how old everybody is, but when I was in college, late 90s, when I was in college, I'm going to give away exactly how old I am right now. If there are, if there are people who remember working out in the late 90s, a lot of it was very manual, right? And, we didn't have the level of information that we have now. But if you imagine your Fitbit gives you so much information. we can track so much information. We can track our sleep patterns using these devices. And now we're getting to that stage in our organizations that we're starting to track more effectively information that exists for us in a variety of different settings and in a variety of different ways. So if you think about it almost like a workout, this is a great way of thinking about your organization and its usage of data. One other thing I want to mention that I think is very important for everyone to consider is this idea of the workout as development over time. So if we are the Association for Talent Development, then as an as people that are running organizations, or if you're a consultant that works for a particular organization, what you're trying to do is you're trying to help that organization show incremental improvement over time. And this is a good lesson from working out. In workouts, we cannot change that quickly. Like, you're not going to go from, being, out of shape into shape in a very, very short period of time. You might be able to do certain things, improve certain areas, but even with an analytic approach, you still have to take time to develop. And I think that's one of the key factors when you are speaking to your stakeholders, or when you're speaking with your clients or your organizations, is to focus on the fact that many of these, these initiatives are iterative in nature. They are growth over time. So you're going to see changes in a variety of different ways. And today we're going to talk a little bit about one approach that we can use to help our organizations grow and improve. Right? So if anybody ever asks you about what's people analytics like, how can I think about this thing? Imagine that your organization is making some sort of change. It's going through some sort of workout. It's trying to, get those summertime abs, right? Whatever that definition happens to be for summertime abs. And that is the way to think about it, right? That we're trying to get better. We're trying to improve over time. All right. And we're using data to track that progress. So in the same way that you might say to someone, yeah, I just did, 150 pounds, 10 reps, 2 sets of 10 reps of this weight. That is exactly what you want to be able to say now with your workout. Very, very important. All right. All righty. Let's talk a little bit about some differences in data. So there are a couple of different types of data that we are going to talk about today. The first type is qualitative. Qualitative data is primarily used to help us understand process. So things like words, images, and objects, right? They help us to understand how things work, why they work the way that they do. Qualitative data, generally speaking, is considered messier than the other type of data, which is quantitative data. Quantitative data helps us to identify sort of pain points that exist within your organization. These data types are things like numbers, anything that is countable, we can think of as being quantitative. The really cool thing we're going to spend some time talking about today is computerized content analysis, which attempts to bridge the gap between qualitative data and quantitative data by taking qualitative data, words, images, etc., and then applying numerical measures to that. So we're going to go through a couple of examples of this. Now, one thing I want to help everybody to understand, one thing that's really important to understand about qualitative versus quantitative data, a lot of times in organizations, people will say, well, I really only care about numbers, or our assumption about an organization is that our stakeholders only care about numbers. But the reality is that if you're going to tell a story, and if you want to understand what the processes are within your organization, then what you need to do is not only do you have to look at numbers, but you also have to understand what's happening. I'll use my workout example to illustrate this idea. Let's say that I'm doing deadlifts. And if you've met me in person, you know I'm a very scrawny man, that I'm not doing a big amount of weight on my deadlifts, right? Part of the problem for that might be, one way to look at this is, Sai, you're only lifting, 100 pounds in your deadlift. That's not enough, right? While you could tell me, yes, that's not enough, you're not lifting enough, the bigger issue might be, why is that happening? You'll notice the quantitative data, the number, might tell you, hey, there's a weakness here that's happening. But if I want to understand why I'm not able to lift that much, somebody might actually have to watch me work out, and they might have to change my form. They might have to, give me, a different diet, right? They might have to do a variety of things. Another way to think about this that could be very helpful, for those of you that are sports fans, I used to collect baseball cards as a kid. And on a baseball card, you get statistics from a variety of different players in a variety of different areas. The statistic on its own is not going to tell you how to help the individual improve, right? It'll just tell you, oh, this person's batting average is low, or this individual's, got an issue in terms of ERA or something along those lines. But in order to actually figure out, hey, what's the challenge here? You have to observe, you might have to talk to the person, you have to identify process. So each of these types of data are useful in a variety of different ways. What computerized content analysis helps us do is it helps us to scan through qualitative data a little bit quicker. And it helps us to identify the pattern and the process a little bit easier, okay? Any questions about that before I move on? I really only asked that so I could take a drink of water. So moving on. All righty, let's see. If there are any other questions, let me know. All right, so what are you guys going to do today? You'll notice that you are playing two different roles here. And I mentioned this earlier. The one role is that you are going to be our actual respondents to the survey. And if you haven't done that yet, that's okay. Hopefully we've got plenty of data to play around with. The other thing you're going to do is once we collect the data and once we analyze the data, you will serve as our subject matter experts. So what's interesting is when we talk about data analytics, especially in an employee setting, if you're collecting data from your employees, in order to understand that data, we need to go back to those employees and have them help us apply meaning to what is in this, what is in this data set, especially as talent development professionals. I'll give you guys a little example. So I was working on a project with sanitation workers, a couple of years ago down in Florida. And we had collected some data and we conducted some interviews and talked to a few of them about information, about stuff that had happened. We collected some other data, some engagement data. And we found that some of the engagement was a little bit low. But as an external consultant, I can't just give meaning to those numbers, right? I might just say, well, okay, engagement is low, right? And that's what I can deliver to a client, but I can't explain why without actually talking to the people that that completed the survey, that gave me this data. Very, very important consideration for us. So when we think about this type of thing, when we have people involved in our organizations, and when we're collecting data from them, we need help, right? I'm not an expert sanitation worker. The only thing I know how to do is take the trash out and wait for it to get picked up. But in order to understand the data, I have to talk to them about it. I've got to get them to provide me with information so that I can derive meaning from that, from that data. So really, really important consideration. So now that we've collected some data from you, we need your help in developing and understanding what that data actually means. All righty. All righty, so let's talk about some of the analyses that we're going to be doing. Just to give you guys a little preview of a couple of different types of analyses that Lyndon will be running in about 10 or 15 minutes. The first type is something called topic modeling. And a researcher named Miriam Posner, she's described topic modeling as a method for is a method for finding and tracing clusters of words called topics in shorthand in large bodies of texts. So one of the things you might have noticed is that in the survey, we asked you all to complete 100 words, around 100 words for each answer that you gave us. And what we're going to do is we want to identify the underlying topics that exist in the terminology that you've given to us. The goal in topic modeling is to identify the big topics that come from a corpus or a group of texts, right? So the idea is that, you know, there are themes, there are commonalities that people are noticing over time. And you can use these for things like open survey responses, which is what we're going to see in a few minutes. I found that these are really useful when it comes to exit interviewing. So for those of you who've been tasked with managing turnover, if you have exit interview data, you can use this technique to identify common themes. And the really cool thing about topic modeling is we might have a sense of what the responses are like, but what happens is that the computer allows us to see what words get clustered together, what things kind of bubble up as categories. All right, we'll see that in just a few minutes. So exit interviews, if you know, sometimes when people complete exit interviews, one of the things that we see that's really important to consider is, you know, not coming to the data with too many preconceived notions. When we've looked at exit interview data in the past, there have been some really interesting surprises. Another really interesting source of data is social media comments. So one thing that you might see, and you might have noticed that I've mentioned exit interviews here right next to social media comments. One thing you may notice is that your employees might say one thing in an exit interview and they might say something else in a social media comment. So if your organization is using Glassdoor or has access to Glassdoor, you may want to compare exit interview data to Glassdoor comments and look for common themes. And one analysis that we've done in the past is data mining exit interviews and then comparing them to social media comments and seeing the comparison between the two. Alrighty, oh, here we go. So Jack has, I'll be doing open-ended interviews in my doctoral research, exploring the link between manager-employee communication and engagement. Could topic modeling work in analyzing the responses? Sure. Actually, we could use topic modeling to analyze open-ended interviews for sure. We'll talk a little bit about how that might work in a little bit. I think Lyndon will show how he's going to analyze this in R in just a bit. So what we're trying to do when we topic model is we're trying to figure out, hey, what are the big clusters that we're noticing in the text? All right. Any other questions so far? Great question from Jack. Going once, going twice. All right. Let's talk about another analysis that we're going to be doing in just a moment. All right. Another really exciting analysis that we're going to be doing is the Tf-Idf. I put the formula up here just because this was a nice looking cartoon, but I wanted to just describe one way that we can look at language frequency is what we call term frequency inverse document frequency. Let's see. Gabby says, oh, can the computer determine which comments are positive versus negative? Yes, actually. So, this is known as sentiment analysis, and this can be done. The one thing I'll say about sentiment analysis, and I'll type this in the chat window so everybody has this. So sentiment analysis is identifying positive and negative words. The one thing that I want to say about sentiment analysis, the big challenge about sentiment analysis is that it's based around the dictionary that you use. So once again, I'm going to show my age to everyone. I'm going to show my age to everybody in just a moment. And I'll say that when I was a kid, because of Michael Jackson, bad meant good, right? And so if you analyze certain phrases, certain language, what you'll notice is that depending on the context and even in the organization that you're in, words might mean something different. Very, very important consideration. Right. So yeah, that is absolutely one of the big challenges in sentiment analysis is word meanings and the dictionary that you might use. Some of the research that I've done uses certain dictionaries that are built for certain specific challenges. So for example, there's a dictionary that I've used for analyzing political leadership, right? Okay, so let's see. G, you're asking which language is better to use to analyze, R, Python? Recommendation to people without coding background and want to start. So I am a big fan of R. I don't really use Python very much. Lyndon, I believe, uses Python. I don't think it's really that important to focus on the coding language necessarily. It's really just different tools. R is pretty flexible. And I don't think it takes that long to learn. You can go to Code Camp. There's a lot of YouTube videos that can show you how to use any of these coding languages. But I'm much less focused on coding languages versus actually, kind of having an understanding of what we're looking for. You can always learn the different coding languages. My suggestion, and this is my personal learning process. So I learned R first, and I'm kind of, playing around with Python a little bit, but R is my primary, coding language. I also use a couple of tools that are freely available that kind of make the process a little bit faster for me. So something like Voyant Tools and Tropes. Both of those programs are free and easy to use. You could use those to analyze a large corpus of text. All right. Did that answer your question? Oh yeah, Lyndon, go ahead.
Hey, just to chime in on that. So there's a lot of changes that so now you can write Python in R. I forgot what it's called, but one of the more recent updates in RStudio was in R about a year or so ago. Lets you kind of write Python in R. As a general theme, Python is a more widely used language. That's because it's going to be used by people outside of, the research and statistics and analytics space. It's programming. So people who are software engineers, cybersecurity folks will be speaking and writing in Python. So it's a more universal language. With that, traditionally, R was preferred because from an academic standpoint, that's what the research nerds kind of tended to focus on. So if that helps to clarify, a lot of the languages are very much, alike. In fact, when you look at job descriptions and postings, it uses it as Python or R. And as long as you can speak, in one language or another and translate things, it's usually pretty good. And a lot of packages from Python exist in R and vice versa. So it's just depending on what you like and prefer. There's differences in the way things work. Like R looks like math. When you write a code in R, it looks like math and looks like statistics. When you write a code in Python, it looks like programming language. So it's about what's easier for you to learn and read and preference.
Lyndon, thank you for that clarification. Thank you for that clarification. I guess as somebody who loves and enjoys statistics, I guess R is where I started, and I've got to kind of force myself to learn how to do more Python stuff. Let's see, we got another, wow, and more comments. All right, let's see. So let's see, Deborah, are SPSS skills transferable to these other languages? So Deborah, I would say maybe not. I think, SPSS they'll give you their output code if you ask for it. I don't know if it's an easy transition to go from SPSS to other languages. It's much easier to go from R into Python. Will says, like Sai, I'm more comfortable with R, but I've used Python for web scraping and then analyzing scraped text in R. Yes, very good. Dania says, can you briefly mention on the common limitations of the technique that may be encountered, for example, for topic modeling and Tf-Idf, do you need a lot of data to use it? So for any qualitative type analysis, and you'll notice this with Tf-Idf, the bigger the data set, the better, right? There's a reason that there's a reason that we asked you guys to answer with up to 100 words. Because if you look at this calculation, term frequency can actually change, change the value of different words and can have a huge impact on how we interpret these things. All right, Kian mentioned, coming from someone who learned SPSS first and recently has ventured into R, unless you've worked within SPSS syntax, it will be quite daunting, but don't let it intimidate you, as it's not nearly as scary as it seems. So one thing I want to mention, I think Kian's comment really focuses in on this, and that is there's a lot of failure. So even though, and Lyndon, I'll let you chime in on this as well, even though I've done this for a long time, there are times where my code doesn't work or where I've screwed something up. Lyndon, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And the thing that's really difficult when you kind of get into this, and my recommendation for anyone trying to start learning is stick with one package or library at a time. You will see that when you go and Google something, there's like 800 packages. There's 50 different ways to do the same thing. And it adds to what makes this so daunting, because what is the right answer? Well, there's 50 right answers. Then you have to learn 50 different ways to solve something. Stick with one package and learn that package library one at a time, and then kind of branch out from there. That's going to be cutting down your need to learn 50 answers to just learning one answer in one package. That'll help out a lot. You'll still fail plenty though.
Absolutely. All right, so Gabby asked the question, are there analysis tools for people who don't know R or Python? So I just shared a link in the comment box to maybe the simplest tool that exists for doing text analytics, and that is voyant-tools.org. If you want to create a word cloud, you want to see term frequency, things like that, the most basic level text analytics, and you don't want to do any coding, that's a good place to start. All right, and then there's another program called Tropes, which you can download. You just have to do a quick Google search of it. I'll try to include that in the package of links as well. That'll host on our site. Okay, very cool. All right, wow, so many questions, very exciting. So another thing I wanted to talk about, another technique we're going to use today is something called the bag of words. The bag of words involves a text, like a sentence or document, that's represented as a bag or multi-set of its words. So this is a really easy way to classify documents, classify information. So this is where the focus group comes into play. This is where you guys as subject matter experts come into play, especially if you're an external consultant, or you work inside of a company, but you are in the HR or the L&D space. If you go into a part of the organization that you don't know the language that gets used there, you need them to give you need the workers in that area to give you meaning to that bag of words. What do these different words mean? What does each part actually help us to understand? Very, very important. All right, so let's take a moment, now that I've talked about these different approaches, and just to give us enough time to get through all of this, I want to talk a little bit about the different models that we're going to be using and the way that we're going to be approaching some of this information. I mentioned this earlier when we were talking about the human brain and how we think about things. The human brain model, there is inherent knowledge, there's associations that we naturally draw, and we apply them to known constructs, known patterns, and we apply them to basic jobs and terminology. This is how we think in in our day-to-day lives. The machine supervised model, this is the bag of words. This is applied to some sort of known construct that we know about and that we understand, where we classify things the way that we want. We know where that data should go. And this is the closest to how we think, because human beings tend to categorize things very, very easily. This is where we say, okay, machine, tell us what's in the data and let's categorize them. I'll give you the categories and put the words into those categories. The last model is the machine unsupervised model, where in the case of topic modeling, we let the data guide us. We don't tell the data anything. We just say, hey, tell us what's bubbling up. Tell us where we should be looking. All right. One thing I want to add, Kian mentioned, he said something very cool in the chat. +1 for DataCamp. I believe they have a 68% off sale right now. 150 per year for the next week, and have outstanding interactive lessons on learning R, Python, and SQL for those who are interested. Thank you, Kian. I appreciate that. There are also a lot of free resources. So you can use R Bloggers, which is a great website. Data Science Central, also a really great website to learn more about these types of things. All right, so these are our three models, right? So basically, machines are trying to supplement our thinking by revealing things in a data set that we normally would miss, all right? Okay, so let's take a moment, let's take a pause, stop, collaborate, and listen. Obviously, Vanilla Ice telling us to kind of slow things down a little bit. Are there any questions before we move on to the second part of our session today, where I hand things off to Lyndon? Any questions about anything that we've covered so far? And Kian mentions, yes, Richard Landers does have a free social science course for IO psychologists. Absolutely. Absolutely. And Lyndon also mentioned Swirl for R. Yeah, is a package that teaches R and R, sort of like DataCamp. Yep, very good tool. Which method would you recommend for focus group data in healthcare setting? So it really depends. Maya, that's the question that Maya asked. She said, which method would you recommend for focus group data in a healthcare setting? So because healthcare is relatively homogeneous, I would say, in terms of goals, in terms of outcomes, I might suggest using topic modeling. Lyndon, what do you think? You know,
I think it's really going to depend on what you're looking at. So we're going to show two different techniques, and either of them could really be applied. It's really the way I think about it in terms of, you know, what model do you use is first, do you have a supervised model where you know what it should be, you have some sort of classification for good and bad, or do you have to do an unsupervised model where you really don't have any idea, and you kind of just have to get, you know, use that as your starting point. So you could use either of those methods, and we'll kind of review that. If what you're looking for, those focus group data, very simply just using bag of words concept, you know, looking at the term frequency and things like that, that's going to really be more helpful than you'd even realize, just looking at that first. And then if you're looking for themes, that's when you get to go to the topic models. And coincidentally, I have examples of both of those later today.
So one other thing I want to mention before we go on is each of these is a different tool for different questions, and they might give you slightly different answers. And so it's not about which technique do I use for X, it's what can I derive based on the question that I have. So let's see. Kian says, I'm a bit confused on supervised versus unsupervised learning. Does unsupervised learning involve hypothesis testing, given we're letting the data guide our own conclusions? So Kian, I'll take this one. So the difference, and since I know you're a psych student, I'll answer it this way. So in many research studies, if we have a hypothesis, we have an idea of what we think is going to happen, right? But it's easier for a lot of qualitative data, it's easier to think of them as research questions, which would be, here's a question that I have, what is the data going to tell me about this research question? So, you know, when you're thinking about the process part of it, that's what we're really focused on. Hopefully that clarifies things for you a little bit. All right, let's take a look. All right.
When we go to our interactive examples, we'll actually see some of the differences between the two of them. So at the end, Kian, if you're still not getting it, just feel free to chime in with questions at the end.
Okay, very good. All right, so let's get to our interactive exercise. I'm going to hand things off to the man, the myth, the legend, Lyndon Llanes.
All right, great. So now that we've heard, you know, a fair bit of conversation and you know, learning about some of this stuff, I kind of wanted to give you the ability to kind of see how this stuff kind of works. So I'm going to launch a poll, and it's a very, whoa, that is very tiny on my screen, but it's a very basic poll, right? It says, you're going to get a word, and you're going to be asked, hey, what's that word kind of, what's it associated with? 3 different jobs. So if you can all take a minute, start looking at it. Can you see the poll, Sai?
I don't see it. Let me see if can everybody else see the poll. Let's see. Hopefully everyone can. Okay, Gabby can see it. Very good. All right. So I don't need to see it. You guys need to see it.
All right. So while we're doing this, people are answering it. It's pretty basic. So the word fire truck is associated with which job? Police officer, firefighter, superhero. It's 100% of people are saying it's fire truck. Pistol is 100% associated with police officer. And we're getting to some of the more interesting ones. The word rescue, it's being associated mostly by superheroes. And a few people are saying firefighters as well. Okay. And then we have the word brave is associated with firefighters and also superheroes. We're seeing in some of these later examples that some of these terms are associated with more than one role. So this while we're looking at this, and I'm going to give people more time to kind of answer, think about this, because this is what you already know, this information. You have inherently learned this sort of thing. You know how to classify these terms as a pistol belonging more to a police officer. So a couple people see pistols with firefighters and superheroes. But predominantly, most people are saying pistols are going to be more aligned with police officers. Rescue is going to be mostly superhero, 57% superhero and 6% firefighter, 43% firefighter, excuse me. So we learned this. You've over time learned that one word is associated more than with another. The reason why this is important is this is the crux for understanding a supervised model. The way the machine learns and understands these things is it's got historic data, or you're giving it data that tells it, the word pistol 86% of the time is associated with a police officer. Let me show end polling so you can all see the results. The word fire truck is going to be 100% more likely to be associated with a firefighter. Can you guys see the results? Oh, let me hit share results, excuse me. How about now? Can you see the results? Yes, yes, yes. There we go. Okay. So if we were to look at this from a supervised model, right? And we said, we found the word or the term fire truck. The model would say, oh, that's probably a firefighter. In historic cases, 100% of them have been firefighter. Pistol, probably police officer. 88% of the time it's related to police officer. When we get to some of these other ones that are a little confounding, right? It's a little bit difficult to know, like a TV show, for example. TV show is associated with all three, mostly superheroes, but all three. So it could be falling into either of those. So the way that people learn this is they've seen this, they've collected that information, and they learned it. Same way that when you talk to small children and there's repetitive kind of reinforcement where they see things and they get, oh, okay, firefighters, they've got fire trucks, police officers, they have pistols. So when Sai mentioned on the previous slide, it's really close to how we think. A lot of these supervised models are trained and built off of this kind of concept of feeding it data for what's good, what's bad, what it should or should not look like, and similar to the way you've learned over time what a firefighter uses in his tools as a fire truck. And the word rescue, they do all of that. Okay? Any questions on that? All right. Sai, can you go to the next slide?
Okay, we're completing the survey. So do you want to share a link for the other survey that we wanted them to do? Or actually, if they're...
No, I think they've already kind of, this was just building in time during the session for people to complete the survey if they haven't. At this point, I've actually, while you were talking, I ran the model already based off of NSIS 15. So we have 18 respondents now.
Okay.
So I think we can skip this part.
Okay, so Lyndon, finally, my talking has paid off. Excellent. All right, let's go to the next one.
Okay, so who's our sample? And I think Sai and I can kind of talk through this. I'm going to pull something into view and share screen. 1 second.
Lyndon, would you like me to stop sharing?
Yes, please.
Okay, there we go. All right. Hey, now you can actually see us, maybe. All right. And then, okay. And so do you, oh, there we go. Now we've got Lyndon screen sharing here. Excellent.
Right. Okay, folks. So the reason why it's important to talk about who our sample is, because it's important because if we were to analyze things in a large aggregate, it's important to know sample distribution. I know we have a lot of research-related folks here, but we want to know about sample representation, if it's okay to generalize our findings to a particular group or the larger population. And that's why it's really always important to look at, your general demographics. So the first thing I want to look at, and this is a free text question here, but out of the 18 respondents, we see that there's an even split between folks here who are analysts, research data engineers, data scientists, who are identifying themselves as people who deal with lots of data, research, models, codes, business intelligence tools, and programs. That's about 39% of our respondents today.
Lyndon, it looks like we can still see the window from the poll result. I don't know if you want to remove that or not.
Oh, poll, stop sharing results. Okay, how about now?
Hopefully that's clear. If it isn't, let me know. All right, I will let you continue, Lyndon.
Great. So we're seeing that about 39%, almost 40% of people are research focused here, analytics focused. The other large percentage of people that we have in today's group is for learning and development practitioners, leadership, development, and talent management, where they really focus on helping to develop people and build content, learning plans, and lead these focus groups. So with this understanding, it's not going to make sense to take the information and data that we have and try to generalize it to an HR generalist where we have zero representation. Or, coach, we've only got 5% of people here, respondents are coaches. So we want to take this into consideration when we try to generalize it and when we understand this. So based off of this, do you think it's okay to analyze what archetype, to analyze this next question, what key topics and skills? Does it make sense to analyze this as whole, to analyze all 17 responses the same in one large chunk? You could go ahead and type that into the chat pod. Sai, how did you see the chat pod while you were presenting? I don't see it anymore.
I click on the chat button. So let's see. Please tell us if it makes sense to look at the entire data set as one big chunk. All right. So far, first answer, Gabby says probably not. Deborah says nope, maybe create clusters/groups. All right. Anybody else with some thoughts about whether or not, based on our data here, based on the roles that people play, do we want to look at this data set as one big chunk, or do we want to break it up a little bit? And Gabby says I would analyze by archetype. Okay, very interesting.
Great.
Greg
so that's
says,
exactly what we were doing. Okay.
Kian says, seems like a quadruple-barreled question. Wow, dangerous. How many barrels is too many? Nadia says, would branch the data into sets of roles, then review. Okay, all right, some good ideas. Feel free to continue.
Okay, great. So we're seeing here, like a lot of people have mentioned, it makes sense to break this up, right? So when we actually look at the example, the analysis I did, when we had 15 respondents, I picked the analysts just because they were a larger group at the time. And with that, we'll see that a lot of these terms are going to look a lot more alike. So when we look at this first question, what are the key topics and themes, skills, techniques, tools that you use for your role? We see data analysis, R, JAS, needs analysis coaching. We see R, M+. And then we see learning and development, needs analysis, facilitation, Excel, PowerPoint. So we see a lot of these things kind of falling into kind of two categories where it's going to really represent, a large chunk of the data is going to be representing these two groups. It's always important to look at that, who our sample size is and who it's representative of, because you'll see that impacting your data greatly. Specifically, I know there was a mention for using Glassdoor data before. That's all well and good. It's important to also consider if you're analyzing a data for a group that is a smaller subset of an organization. Like I work at Verizon, a large chunk of our workforce, 140,000 people, right? It's a big company. Most of them are going to be retail sales representatives, customer service representatives, and things of that sort. So when we look at aggregated Glassdoor data, we have to know that it's representing that group more, not necessarily indicating how our developers or data scientists feel. Cool thing to note, Glassdoor actually lets you split that up more. I think there's a way to, if they have a large enough sample, you can actually subset by title. Gender. So we got a pretty even split here. 55 and 44. It's actually pretty close to national average where you have more men than women. I think when I was looking at it nationally, it's about 55% male and 44% female in the workforce. So it's a little bit backwards, but it's still really close. And then when we look at our race and ethnicity, 2 or more races. Woo! My son is 2 or more races, so I love seeing that. A lot of Asian folks in here, so it's good to look at these things and understand that. The one I really want to focus on is tenure and HR. A lot of senior people in this room, right? 50% have 8 or more years in HR. So that's really interesting when we look at some of our questions and we understand them later. How do we interpret this? When we look at some of the things like, hey, what are you focusing, or what would make you want to stay in the chapter, right? A large chunk would be focusing on this group if we analyzed in aggregate. Also, if we wanted to break it up into groups, we have to know that, hey, let's say that, we multiplied this by 1,000 or 100, this is 1,800. We'd have to know that, like, hey, this is a really small percent, and this is an even smaller percentage. So knowing how do we generalize or understand the data is going to be important. How many years, and we have to see that this is, despite the amount of tenure in this group, we have a lot of senior people in HR here. Membership in ATD is pretty small. We're talking about people with less than a year of experience or so. So that's also important to know when we're looking at this data and saying, how can ATD use this to create its strategic planning? We have to know that these aren't exactly veteran senior members here. These are all new, fresh people. So that's important to consider when we do our follow-up analysis, which we'll be kind of talking about later on, which we'll present at a later date. Today's just kind of preliminary findings, easy stuff. Okay. Lastly, most of the people haven't really volunteered. We have a couple of volunteers. So any questions on that? Do we have a firm grasp for understanding, hey, this is why it's important to look at our demographics and our breakup of people? Yeah. Okay. I think that sounds about right. Good. So the next thing we're going to jump into when we look at our slides, let me just make sure I'm on point. Okay, so the next part we would talk about is, it's right now it's time to analyze. So we're going to get to really analyzing some of the data. So over here, what we're looking at, if you can still see my screen, is in our console. And you can see my script over here, and this is the console. For people who don't really understand what this is, this script is kind of like the recipe, okay? This is a cookbook, a recipe. I've written it. You can also copy and paste and use somebody else's recipe book, but this is kind of like what gets saved. This is the work that's being done. Whatever you type in has to go in here to actually get happen. And then the environment here, this is where we're getting to see what have I got in some plots. So I'm going to, I know we have a mixed group, so I'm going to try and go through this at different levels of detail. If anyone has questions, feel free to stop me and ask. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to load these libraries. You don't need all of these. These are just the ones I tend to use. So they kind of auto-populate whenever I use R. And the next thing we're going to do is after we load the libraries are what give us the functions and packages to analyze the data in the way we're going to be doing it. The second thing we're going to do is we're just going to create a cleaning function. So what this function does is it says, hey, using TM package up here, let's go and for every single corpus, every single block of words that we're using or analyzing, let's remove the punctuation. Let's lower all the text to lowercase. Let's remove stop words. I have here remove words. There's some words that I automatically tend to remove. This is from a previous analysis, but you can build your own library here of terms, list of terms you want to exclude. Remove white space, and then stem documents. So what this does is it's going to clean the data, and we'll see why that's important a little bit later. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to load the results. So if I were to go and download this from the Google Drive, it saves onto my hard drive as ATD membership survey, people analytics in action, right? And in R, you draw this arrow, and it's, I call it, I forgot the specific terminology, I call it the namer. It names things, it defines things. So it's defining this as survey data. So we're going to go then take all of that survey data and filter it for this question here. The question, what archetype most closely matches your role? If you remember that question. And I said, let's focus on analysts and researchers. From there, it's going to create a subset of data that gives us survey filtered. And it's saying, hey, these are the jobs, this is the data for all the people that we talked about who kind of answered themselves as analysts and researchers. We're going to then create a vector source, a vector corpus. All of this is kind of outlined in some of the link that Sai gave us, so don't worry about it. But the important thing to look at is here, we're going to clean this data. And after we clean it, we're going to create this matrix, because it's really hard to understand this information without creating some sort of matrix. It's going to be really easy to understand what I'm talking about in just 1 second when I open this up. So out of all the respondents, what it did was it took all of the words in matrix, all of the words from the fields, and it listed them horizontally. And for each person, each number here corresponds to a response. Each person's kind of say, did we see that word, yes or no? So what that's really going to help us understand is what are the terms that people are using. Removing sparse terms, this really isn't a necessary step because we don't have a lot of data. And we're going to go here. We're running the term frequency. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up because we already ran it. And we can see, hey, what are the more common terms that we're seeing from folks who are analysts, research, data analysts, and things like that. It's very easy to see that, it's expected to see that, hey, with the term analysis shows up 9 times out of I think there were only 6 respondents. So it's a very small amount of people. Data shows up a lot, Excel, Manager. So this is a great way to kind of take a look at this and kind of say, this is what I would expect to see. This is really helpful. I think Miriam asked what technique makes sense. So if you didn't know what you were looking for, you could also run this sort of analysis and say, what are people talking about? What are these terms? And you could see it here. It could help you give you a better example or idea of what we're looking for. Other thing to note is that these are stemmed. So analysis, or let's say manage, right? This is important because you don't want to have this split into manager, managing, managed. The reason why we do this in cleaning our data is it changes manager, managing, managed, management, 4 terms and condenses them down to 1. So that helps us quantify and analyze things appropriately. It's really going to help us find more clear pictures and patterns. It cuts out the noise. Okay, the Tf-Idf, I know Sai talked about that. For the sake of our data set, I'm going to skip that because we don't have enough data. But the important thing that you will see from Tf-Idf is that if we were talking about the same thing, like these are all analysts, right? Since these are all analysts, we would likely see this word analysis be reduced in value because it's present in everybody's, like so many people are saying it, that it kind of becomes less important, less unique. Tf-Idf is great for finding unique things. Did R pop wipe during cleaning? R was probably wiped because of the fact that it's only one letter. Let me just check. Yeah, it was wiped. It's a good question. You could also kind of write exclusion to say, hey, let me control for that by saying keep R. When I've done these sort of analysis for gender, searching for gender bias in postings, job postings, and in data sets, one of the things I do is, like, very simply put, look for the term his, her, or things that are indicating gender. And there are times where I'll get false positives where it's, it'll say his/her, right? So the way I control for that is after I run the analysis, I'll say any place where you found his, her, change that from a true to false. So there's ways to clean up and post-process. Again, this is just preliminary analysis and proof of concept here. So to me, being a data person, this is what I want to see. I want to see the term. I want to see the frequency. This gives me all the things that are important. But that doesn't always resonate with everybody. And being somebody who has to analyze and know how to use data, it's equally important to be able to take your data and make it understandable to other people. So we're going to run here this word cloud. So what it's going to do, we're going to first create a new thing called words. All right, and we're going to say from words, go and take all of the words that we found in this matrix of terms. Okay. So in this matrix of terms, let's sort them by frequency. So it's doing that decreasing frequency. And then let's go and color them. You know, say we need to at least see one occurrence of one, max of 200 words, and let's sort it. That's what we get here when we see this. Let me make this a little bit bigger. So can you all read that? This is a word cloud that's kind of saying, if we wanted to look at what are the terms defining the skills or techniques and things that are defining this archetype of an analyst, data scientist, data engineer, we're seeing analysis, data, we're seeing manage, so data management. I ran this as a single term, but we can run bigrams instead of unigrams. So we would see data management more than likely correlate. We'd see presentation, so there's a lot of presenting data. There's a lot of use for Excel. So for folks who are saying, I don't know how to use R, Python, Excel can actually get you really far. And you know, it might be an interesting follow-up, like you can do like sort of this sort of analysis in Excel to a little bit of a degree, not as accurate, but you can still do that by saying, give me the first 5 letters of each word to kind of help you figure things out, and you kind of create different categories for that. That might be a nice follow-up that we do, kind of showing how to do high-end analysis with less technical skill sets. But these are all things, to me, when I look at this, because I'm in this group, this makes sense to me. I expect to see analysis being high, and I expect data to be the next largest, followed by management, presentation, Excel. How would you rate the analysis capabilities of some survey softwares that are out there, SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics? I think that they're all fine. We've built this data set off of Google Forms. So they can do some pretty decent things. It's just what do you want it to do is really important. I don't know if any of them actually have any type of text analysis built into their tools yet.
Lyndon, I want to just add something to that real quick. So SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics, etc., might have some very basic, I would say, word cloud functionality in it. But usually the stuff that we're showing today, like the real word counts, Tl-Idf, bag of words techniques, they're not housed inside those platforms. So usually what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to download that data as an Excel or a CSV and then run it into in another program, whether it's R or something else. All right, back to.
Yes. So like exactly what Sai was saying, that is in fact what we did here, where we took the data from the survey, downloaded it, and then opened it up in R. Interesting side note that I didn't realize till now. I know someone was asking about Python versus R. A really cool thing that Python can do that R doesn't have. I remember I mentioned that there's it's more universal. Think of Python like Apple, right? Everyone's got integration or knows how to kind of work with Python. A little bit less so with R. Because of that, Google Scripts and Google Suite, right? They have I forgot what it's called, their notebook or their they have a particular suite for editing code, but it allows you to plug Python code into it, and it will read your Google Forms, your Google Sheets data directly from there. So it's really kind of cool to look at that if you're wanting to think about, what kind of automation can I build in. You can build a survey and have it analyzed and pull directly into from Google Sheets without having to do any import or exports or having to work any type of specific virtual environments. Okay, so I'm going to close this. It's a good question, Gabby. I think at the end, I'm going to talk about some alternatives and things that we can do for people who don't know R or Python. And I think for word clouds, I think Sai had a link that he shared earlier and some other tools that are really helpful to kind of do these things. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do, we're going to do a little bit of another interactive exercise. Okay. Is this in presentation mode, Sai?
No, it doesn't look like you're in presentation mode right now. Sorry, so you're.
Okay, hold on. Display settings, self presentation view settings. Give me 1 second, stop. Share. Okay. So the next thing we're going to look at here is the other set of information that we talked about. The other example of modeling is unsupervised models. Now, this is intentionally written in Spanish because I'm going to assume that not everyone in this room can speak Spanish, right? Is there anyone in the room that does speak Spanish? Can someone kind of chime in if they can? A little bit. Okay, great. Yep. Okay, Kian, Yanya, great. This is really good. So for many cases, many times, we don't know the data. We're not familiar with the data, or we'll be asked to analyze things that we are not familiar with, and we have to rely on other people to help us understand that data. This is a great example. because you might not speak Spanish. Okay, look, William can say, you know, I'm not sure if William speaks Spanish or not, but he can see certain words that are common, like he sees food. Oh, okay. You're seeing food, animals, locations. Oh, very good. Good. So what other themes? Anyone else chime in? Chime in what you're seeing. Like, so I hear foods, I hear animals, locations are themes. Lots of chicken, yeah. Lots of chicken. Muy poquito. That's good. That's good. I took like 3 years of Spanish, and my proficiency goes up to saying "Donde puedo ir al baño?" and "un más" for when I'm at the bar, and I say, you know, I just say, you know, "un más." So I'm awful with Spanish, but I thought it's always a good exercise to kind of take a look at this. Good. Animals. Okay, beach, cat, house. Great. So some of these are, so we're relying on people to give us these patterns, right? So people who don't have any idea of what we're looking at. You know, if you had no idea about Spanish, you couldn't read any of this, right? Pizza wasn't so obvious. We would need someone to give us an idea of what the patterns were. In the same way that in this chat pod, people have chimed in and people have said, hey, I'm seeing patterns for foods. I'm seeing patterns for locations and animals. We needed someone to give us those patterns because we had no idea what it is. That's the same way that we can think about an unsupervised model, right? When you have no idea what's going on, unsupervised model tells the machine, I don't know what I'm looking at. It's all Spanish to me. Can you tell me, machine? Can you tell me what some of these patterns are? Can you help me make sense of this? So that's the way, in the way that we can rely on other people, subject matter experts, to kind of do that, or to find patterns for us. We ask the machine to kind of do that. And then just for some emphasis, you know, like, hey, is it easier now, right? If we take a look at this, can you kind of derive some kind of pattern now? Well, we can see that there are 3 groups that I initially thought of. And there's some words here that purposely exist in different groups, right? So we see pollo, which means chicken, and pollo here again. We see that these black terms, huevos fritos, which is fried eggs, pizza, bistec, beef. So we see chicken in things that you can eat, but we also see chicken existing here in animals, right next to the elephant, and the vaca, which is also beef. Okay, animals, things. Yep, very good. Thank you, William. So that is kind of the way that we can kind of think of this. This is kind of like the way the human brain kind of thinks about these things, right? Where we could use the same process, like, hey, how we have to ask someone who knows Spanish, someone who's familiar with the context, subject matter experts, to kind of find a pattern for us. We can also ask machines to kind of help us do that. And that's where we get to the concept of topic modeling. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna exit the share and go back to my R3, screen 3, share. Okay. Okay, are we back on R? Can you guys see this?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, great.
I don't know,
Great.
hopefully everybody else looks like, yep, everybody else can.
Okay. So when we get to this, for this, I kind of narrowed down to like the actual libraries you would need. So topic models, tidytext, ggplot, dplyr. Some of this data we've already kind of had loaded. I've named it, I've defined it, this data set, as survey data 2. And what I'm doing is I'm going to create a vector source of this information. This question is, what is the primary reason you joined ATD NYC? All right, and we're going to, again, we're going to set this up, and we're going to create our vector source, we're going to create our corpus, and we're going to create some clean data. We need to clean it for reasons I'd mentioned before. And we're going to look at a document term matrix. And we're going to create it into a document term matrix. that's exactly the same matrix that we looked at before, where it kind of takes all the terms and it lists them. And these are kind of like the documents, document 1 through 10. Okay. And we're going to go and we're going to say, hey, machine, can you help me understand this, right? R2D2, we're going to use an LDA model to define this. And that's what this function here does. This function says, use latent Dirichlet allocation. I probably butchered that. I hate saying that full name. Everyone just calls it LDA. But open up this document term matrix, right? And look for 3 groups. K is how many buckets do we want to try and tell it to find, okay? And try and find 3 patterns here. Now, this is an important thing to look at because sometimes you could do previous analysis to kind of determine how many different clusters you want to build, or you can just guesstimate or test an hypothesis test. This is not what I did here. That's an arbitrary number 3, but there are ways to kind of do a better analysis so that you're not just kind of stabbing in the dark. Okay. We're going to define our topics as, and then we're going to look at our top terms. Okay. So if we opened up our top terms, right, we are looking at this list here. This list is telling us topic 1. So the machine doesn't know what it is. It's just saying, hey, I found that all of these terms are probably related to some topic. I don't know what it's called. The machine says, I have no idea what this is. I'm just going to label it number 1. And then it's got number 2 here, and it's going to label number 3 here. So here's the terms that it's finding, the top terms, and it's got the beta here. The beta is the probability that learn is related to topic 1. The probability that people is related to topic 1. How is this different from, say, latent class analysis? Doesn't that also deal with? It's similar. It's similar. I forget the exact differences with LCA, but they are similar concepts and constructs. You will find that there's a ton of different ways to do different analyses, and they will make your head explode. Frankly, you could usually argue a case for one analysis versus another. And that's kind of cool too, because it gives you job security.
Lyndon, one thing I want to say to answer that question, a lot of this has to do with the math behind latent class versus latent versus LDA, right? Yeah. So it really, at that level, if you're choosing LCA versus LDA, really what you're looking at is the formula. So, and then that also goes back to the research question, like, you know, what is the value of clustering versus topic modeling? That goes back to the formulation. Yeah. All right.
Yep. Let's see. Another thing to think about also is if you're interested in this, another very popular, easy one to tune is cosine, for talking about the comparison between documents and corpus. Cosine is also very easy to use. What it does is it kind of, if we were to look at a sentence, it measures the distance between the 2 terms, and the distance between the 2 of them helps you understand, hey, it's more like this versus that. It's not absolute, it's relative to the sample, but it's also worth considering if you're interested in exploring. So before let me step away from my nerd thinking. We took a look at what those terms look like, right? These are the top terms, but really a lot of people aren't going to understand that. Like, what does that mean? I don't understand it. That's where we go here, and we're going to graph the terms. Okay. I've already gone ahead and done that, and I'm going to open it up. So when we graph the terms, it looks like this. And we went and we used a topic model to go and look at the question for why did you join ATD? And these are the responses that we've kind of found. Here's the pattern that the machine found. Okay. What it's seeing is there's one cluster here called, and we see these terms, learn, people, therefore, social, seen, seem, right? It's a little bit hard to see a huge pattern towards the tail because we don't have a whole lot of data. But the first chunk learn, people, therefore social, scene. And then the second group here, we have network, current, cell, potential, outlet, member, knowledge. And then the third, we have the key terms being trend, transit, stay, somewhere, research, NYC. So this is, I think, where I'm going to turn it over to Sai to kind of start doing a little bit of a focus group on, using you all to kind of understand this data.
All righty, everybody. So let's take a look at these, at these topics. So the first set of terms, we've got learn, people, so therefore social, scene, theme, really, opportunity, never, great friend, event, enjoy, done, develop, curious, analytics, and action. Do you have any ideas about what what might we name this first topic? Any ideas about what we might call that? Right. So Greg says purpose, not bad, not bad. And it's very interesting that you say purpose because it looks like there are different action steps here, right? That are listed here almost, right? Okay, so purpose. Anybody else have any other ideas about what we might call topic one? Is everybody cool with purpose? Or if there are other ideas, I'm open to them. Anything else? Any other common themes that you might have noticed? And notice these are so Nadia says community/networking. Really interesting, community/networking. So this is kind of honing in a little bit deeper. It seems like people want to learn, want to connect. But I think that seems to be, Nadia, I'll say that I think that topic 2 might be more community networking because the top term is in topic 2 is network, current, cell, potential, outlet. So, that seems to be a reason there why people are attending. Deborah says social learners. Okay.
I like that.
Yeah?
I can see that.
So for Lyndon, would you say that for topic 1 or topic 2?
Topic 1, I think I could see the social learners there.
Okay.
I think topic 2, it looks more, when I'm looking at it, those are the people who are like, I'm here for a job, I want to develop, like, it's almost like topic 1 are the people there who want to learn and continually develop. And looks like topic 2, those are the people who really want to find job, right? Network to get a job. Okay. They want to sell. There's things I see the word job in there. There's knowledge. So that might be an interesting way to look at it too, where you have people go here to learn something.
Yeah, maybe topic 2 would be networking and sales, right?
Yeah, that's more job related. Yeah, okay, and career.
Job, career related. Okay, and then topic 3. Any ideas about topic 3? So we've got trend, we have transit, we have stay. My favorite term here, somewhere. And the other really interesting thing about this set is, Lyndon, have you ever seen this before where all the terms have the exact same bars? It looks like there's maybe this is like all the other terms just that didn't fit into the other 2 topics just ended up here.
Yeah.
Dare says randomly curious. So I actually think random might work here, or in some cases, and Lyndon, I don't know how often you do this. Sometimes I keep an other category available for some of these.
Yep, I would agree. So, here where I said I randomly picked the number 3, it looks more like, hey, you could really just define it as 1 and 2, and we don't have enough for 3, not with the data set. So if we had more information, I think you'd start to see fleshed out some more clear themes and things here. But I think this is kind of great for initial preliminary data that was kind of running like 30 minutes, 20 minutes to kind of look at it, saying, hey, these people kind of really join for the social learners, or they're joining for like network career type stuff.
So Will asks a good question. Would a good practice for informing your topic labeling be to go back to the actual responses and search for example comments that include highest frequency terms? So this is actually common practice. So in in topic modeling, if you don't tell the computer how many topics you want to have, and if you just let this bubble up, sometimes it's a good idea to go back and dig through and see what the most common terms happen to be. And what the best thing is, and we know you're not a plant, so not bad. Yeah, so this is a good idea, and it's always good to look at terms within their original context, so to identify where that original context happens to be.
Right. And there are functions that you can.
That?
Yeah. Just along those lines, like there are things that you could say. Let's say we went back and we said, hey, let's look at learn. There's a function called KWIC. I think it's in Quantitative library, but it just says find the word learn and its keyword in context. Tell me how the word learn is being used. So that's really helpful to look at. It's also another cool thing to look at when you see this information. To understand your labeling, it's also really important to understand that this is a machine helping you think. It never should be replacing human thought. So a thing I love to kind of point out is if the PSYOP machine learning data science contest winner, I think last year or the year prior, from Walmart, the way he won was to manually go back and take a look at stuff and relabel them, where a lot of the other people kind of weren't really doing that manual human process of like reading through all the unknown, all of these others. He would have gone back and taken a look at all of these things that are other, unknown, and reclassified them to see if they fit into here, to get the data to be more accurate, to retrain the model. So really cool to see this as your first pass and then say, how do I iterate and make this more accurate? Well, I'm going to use, the machine got me this far. I'm going to use my human intellect and things that the machine doesn't have to kind of make a better model than what normally would exist if it was just the machine.
Alrighty, any other really good questions? Let's see, William says, simple yet brilliant, a lot of dedication. 2 props to the winner that year. Yes, absolutely. So, we still need humans to provide meaning to what computers happen to find. All right, any other questions? Or Lyndon, do you want to show any other analyses? Or should we just move into Q&A?
Q&A, and I think where everyone's done and tired of hearing me talk. So I've got... It's enough nerding out for me. I'm going to put the takeaways on another page in the Q&A. Just give me a minute to switch screens for you, Sai.
Okay, no problem. Alrighty, so let's just mention a couple of big takeaways from our session. Just some things I want you to remember as you work on your own qualitative analyses. And so we've shown you some computerized content analysis tools, but ideally, what I want to encourage everybody to do is to learn more about your people, talk to them, despite what you might hear from some vendors or from stakeholders in your organization. Talking to them, qualitatively understanding what happens within the organization, still important. Number 2, ask the right questions, right? Identify what the what the questions actually are. Oh, Gabby has a question, so I will let her. If you want to type it, you can, or if you want to unmute and speak.
I think it'll be easier if I just say it. So
okay.
I have gone through the painstaking process of trying to categorize text data from comments in surveys, where I've literally done searches for keywords and created extra columns to try to categorize them, and it's just painstaking and horrible. So for those of us who want to get data and categorize data and extract, and also creating a column where I've manually listed, okay, is this a positive or negative comment or so forth, would you say Voyant is probably the best thing to do that? Like if I had a spreadsheet that had a column of text comments, are there any tools out there that could help me extract and categorize that without having to do it manually and without knowing R or Python? That's my question.
So I would say Voyant Tools is a pretty good start. It'll at least dig through some of the very basic terms. It won't give you positive or negative sentiment necessarily.
Okay.
There's another tool that I mentioned called Tropes that's also free that you can use that will give you sort of really basic positive, negative terminology. But the problem is when you're using those tools is the dictionary that they're using is just a generic dictionary. So that is like the most basic thing that you could potentially use. There might be some other free tools that I might have to dig around to suggest, but those are some easy ones. I would also, the other thing, it depends on how many comments you happen to have, but you can in some cases just cluster them and then identify some common terms that are coming out of certain types of surveys. The other thing that we did, that Lyndon and I did, and this goes to our takeaway as well, is sometimes you can kind of move questions in a direction where you can find out whether you already know whether the language is positive or negative. So sometimes I might ask, like, tell us one positive thing about your experience. Tell us about one negative thing in your experience. And so the person answering the question has already defined the language as being positive or negative. And then all you have to do is look for commonality at that point. And you can throw those answers into a word cloud and identify what's in there. Gabby, does that help?
It does. I mean, I mean, one of my takeaways is that, if you really want to work with people analytics on your team, you should have someone on your people team or HR team or IT team or whatever that actually knows some of these languages and can help you with this. Because I think there are things out there, and I think I've always wanted to be very data driven, but I don't know these languages, and that's not my background. So I've always tried these little workarounds, that I think are limited. Like when I see what you can do, all the customizations you can do, it's like, oh, what I've been doing is pretty rudimentary. So it makes me eager to, work with other people that can do this stuff.
Sure. And one thing I want to say is even the rudimentary stuff, even if you get just a basic sense, even the process of like reading through comments is actually incredibly valuable. Even if you break up comments into, let's say, department or location, and you read through them, that is incredibly valuable. That can actually give you a ton of insight into what's happening into your organization. Lyndon, did you want to add anything? I don't know if you...
So I don't know about any specific tools that are free or going to help you do this. And if there were, I would just be careful about how reliable it would be. I'm not sure what you would use analysis for, but that's also one of the things you kind of have to think about is, hey, if I don't know enough about it, can I have someone to look at this and just kind of vet it before I go and buy it, right? Before I invest in this, just because you don't want to be the person who buys into something that was, for selection, for example, in assessments, you don't want to be the person who buys an assessment that looks great on paper and it says all the right things and it says all the catchy terms, but the science isn't there. So it's important to have someone that can help answer those questions. Also, you mentioned something about people needing to know Python R. This is a pretty, this is a higher level analytics scales. Remember, a lot of people said Excel. I think Excel was one in the top 3 terminologies for the analysts, research folks in this room. It's important to think about that because I didn't start off saying, oh yeah, I'm going to totally want to do this coding. I started off with some good critical thinking skills and Excel, and then spending a lot of time doing something in Excel and saying there's got to be a faster, easier way, and then just kind of stepping up from there. But you could go pretty far with Excel with some of the links that Sai gave, but you definitely need to know how to structure your data in the way to take questions and build analysis around it.
one other thing I want to mention that I think is very, very important is, before we get to Kian's question, is that's why we're here. That's part of the reason we're doing this session. So if you have a question, feel free to reach out to us. So Lyndon, do you want to define the beta statistic again? Is it a measure of how much that one word ties to a particular cluster? Yes. So it is basically how closely that word relates to that topic area. So how often it appears in that topic area. Lyndon, do you want to add anything to that definition?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ken. I don't remember because I don't use, I don't particularly use the beta statistic all that much. I don't know about the scale range. So I know that there are, Sai has an example that very much clarifies some more details around it. To make this digestible and usable, easier to understand, specifically for the topic model, I think I use the same exact tutorial that he has, just to kind of make it easier to kind of follow. There are other kind of analysis that you might want to consider, including k-means, clustering, and things like that. Okay. What examples of business problems, interesting people, analytics assignments with unusual findings, and can you share with your experience? Good question.
I can share one,
yeah.
but I'll let Lyndon go first.
So I would say with with text, using text analytics and classification, it has really changed the way we consider and think about our workforce planning, because it gives us a way to kind of see patterns and things that we wouldn't have seen previously. So a great example, if we were to go back, maybe I can, which screen is sharing down here? I'm going to go back and bring this over here. Okay. I'm going to bring this out. And we go look at these responses. This is actually going to be really helpful. So if we looked at this, these are all the titles that people have put in. There's a lot of variance here. Associate Director, APV, Learning Recruiter, Technologist, Managing Director. We've got a People Scientist, a couple of students. So all of these, there's a huge variance here, 17 responses. And it's categorized into so many different possible answers. Over here, there's only, what, 6? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5. So with classification, we were able to take all of this and say, when someone said, oh, I need more associate directors of training, and I need to plan for that, or how I need to create strategy for acquiring that, it's not about thinking I need to collect one more, because we run them through a classification model to understand we don't need just one more. It's actually these first few titles map to this, and I need 7, not 1. So that changes how I have to, my strategy, it changes my learning strategy, because I don't have to account for, learning one person. I need to account for 7, so I need to build more curriculum. It's really important. It's a reaching critical mass. So that helps us adjust our workforce planning strategy and along those lines. And similarly, taking this and applying it to skills helps us understand what skills do we actually need to develop. When we combine this by what are the jobs that, when we can't hire for a job, like the really hard to find jobs, what are those skills? Understanding what those skills are in demand in terms of like how high in demand it is, and then taking it to our L&D team and saying, this is what you should be teaching. I hope that's a good, helpful example.
That's a great example, Lyndon. I'm going to add one example. So with one of the sports teams, this is actually a very simple example that Gabby, you might find it helpful as well. So with one of the sports teams that we worked with, all we did in our engagement measure was we included a question about 3 things that the organization, that the employees felt that the organization was doing well, 3 things that they could improve on, and what we identified was that there were, some issues around just compensation, understanding and explaining compensation to employees. And that was, that led to a discussion and conversation about what, the organization could do to talk to their employees more effectively about something as simple as compensation. And that that bubbled up across 2 different areas of that question. There are actually, in the link that I shared, there's actually links to some academic research that we did related to related to, positive and negative comments in social media. And so we did that with urgent care centers. And one of the things we noticed was that the drivers of good and bad service, they were the same words. So it didn't matter whether you used, positive, whether it was positive or negative comments. What you really saw was that it was the same thing. So if you could change some service behaviors in healthcare, that you could actually, the same behaviors were driving both positive and negative comments. So those are some of the things that we've seen in applied settings. Okay, got another question from Jin Wang. What aspects that people with IO background can contribute to people analytics projects? Any examples? So in terms of what IO psychologists can do, I think any of these examples, both Lyndon and I come from an IO psychology background. We're not data scientists by training. We're both trained in IO psychology. So, any of the stuff actually the example that Lyndon gave is a perfect example of looking at job titles and kind of collapsing that into smaller categories. I would also say that kind of the research design and focus that you learn in an IO psychology program can help you to do any of these things, for sure. There's a couple of great examples. I mentioned this to Will as well, that there's a great example of performance ratings and clustering comments in performance ratings as either positive or negative, and seeing what words bubble up to see what managers are evaluating in their performance appraisals. What is it that people are thinking are positive actions? What are people thinking as negative actions? You can do that with the critical incident technique as well. So hopefully that helps. Any other questions? Or actually, Lyndon, do you want to add anything to that question? Kian said,
just really quick, something that we have that brings value is the concept of validation is a really big thing that we're able to kind of understand. IO psychologists have we talk about 6, 8 different types of validity. That is huge in helping to understand how to interpret and analyze the data. And they're in the same thing when we talk about understanding process and sampling. It's really important because I have data scientists on my team, and they are fantastic, phenomenal. They could do better programming and coding than I can. But it's important to have these conversations when they kind of create a model based off of one particular field. It's important to say, hey, you can't use that field, and this is why, here's the noise. Or a great example is when people take resumes and they create text models for resumes, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally acceptable to do that. But it's important to know how you can use it and when it's appropriate to use it, the limitations of that. I've seen in many cases, the data scientists don't necessarily, pure data scientists don't initially see this and say, oh, I can only use resumes this far, or here's the limitation, or here's I don't understand the confounding variables, the nomenological network that make resumes inappropriate for hiring decisions solely, right? It can only get you so far. So I hope that's helpful.
One thing I want to add to that's a great answer from Lyndon, but I want to add one thing. So you'll notice there are a couple of different types of people that are in this session today. There are, or 3 types of people that might be interested in being involved in these types of projects. One are hardcore data science people that maybe they don't know a lot about human resources. They don't know a lot about talent development. Then there are people who are trained in people analytics, HR analytics. We're kind of in the middle. And then there are people who are purely talent development HR. Well, we need the HR talent development folks to help us provide meaning to the data that we can find. So, whatever your role happens to be, whether you are a person who's providing meaning and helping us to develop and design and think through programs, or if you're the person that's doing the back-end computer work, every person is really valuable in that process. So I really want everybody to take that away, is that even if you're not doing the coding or the coding yourself or the analysis yourself, you can provide meaning, you provide context, because data without context doesn't help us to understand anything. All right, so we're quickly running out of time. You might have noticed that I shared the post-event survey. Please, please, please. I know I've already asked you to do a survey once before, but if you can give us some feedback about this session, Lyndon and I would love to hear it. We would love to learn about, what you thought about today's session. And I really appreciate all the time, energy, and effort. I've shared the additional resources that I'm hosting on the Talent Metrics website. I will email that to everybody as well. Thank you guys for being a great audience. Lyndon, any final thoughts, any final words before we sign off?
No, just if you could really fill that survey out. It's really helpful for us if you comment on, the level of detail, because I struggle with, hey, how much nerdiness do I want to throw in here? Because I can spend an entire hour and a half talking algorithm and models and data architecture and structure, but I'm pretty sure that's not what everyone wants to do. So do chime in that survey and say, okay, the level of detail was great, or nerd out more, or peel back on the nerdiness and give me something more tangible to hold on to. Would love that.
Greg, hashtag how nerdy. Great. One other thing I want to mention, if you enjoyed today's session, little self-promotion from me. Next week, we'll be doing another webinar about AI, and you can sign up for that at this link. So please feel free to join us for that. Thank you guys so much for your participation. I really enjoyed it. And hopefully, we'll have another, Lyndon, we got to set up another event. If you have any suggestions for future events or speakers, we're open to it. We're happy to have anybody from the people analytics side come and speak about this topic. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Time to stop the recording and to let everybody move on to the next stage of their lives. Oh my God, I'm on screen. All right. Talk to you guys later.